This power grab, this attempted power grab that took place today in flagrant disregard for our separation of powers, has a home, not in the Constitution, in Project 2025. The American people hate Project 2025, so Donald Trump spent his campaign trying to distance himself from Project 2025, but then he put one of the authors of Project 2025 in charge of the Office of Management and Budget, who is, as we saw in the budget hearing, out one side of his mouth saying, oh, President Trump doesn't have anything to do with 2025. He disavowed it. And as President Trump's appointee to OMB, merrily implementing Project 2025. This is exactly aligned with the Project 2025 playbook that Americans rejected so much that Trump had to lie and pretend he rejected too. In addition to being unconstitutional, that's not just an allegation any longer. A court today here in the District of Columbia found it to be unconstitutional and has ordered a stop to this pause. And that is a relief, because for people in my state, today was a scary day. Medicaid was stopped. The portal to the Medicaid system that the state reaches into, was closed. Medicaid, people say, what is Medicaid? Medicaid is how a great many American seniors pay for their nursing homes. If you're shutting down Medicaid for your jollies, what you're doing is threatening the security of elderly folks living in nursing homes for whom Medicaid pays the bill. We have in Rhode Island and in other states gone through very significant addiction crises. Addiction recovery is very often paid for through Medicaid. So when you shut down Medicaid and close the portal, you are threatening people who are fighting bravely their way through their addiction, trying to get well and better. And suddenly President Trump is cutting the legs out from under them by closing the Medicaid portal and threatening Medicaid. 300,000 Rhode Islanders get supported by the Medicaid system. So this sent a lot of fear through a lot of people. I know there are people in the Trump administration who enjoy that. They get their kicks out of creating fear and having people, cruelty as their pastime. But this is getting a little carried away. Firefighters and police officers. I spoke this morning to the major county sheriff's association, and they immediately raised the concern, what about my HIDA grant? For those of you who've been in law enforcement, you know what a HIDA grant is. For firefighters, it's the AFG grant, the Assistance to Firefighter grants, through which they buy safety equipment, breathing apparatus, new fire engines and vehicles. So all of that, panic stop, because this rash and unconstitutional decision was made. Kids in school often are supported by federal programs. Head Start is a particularly good one. We had a very well-loved mayor of our capital city, Providence, Rhode Island, who started in Head Start and became the mayor of our capital city. Head Start is a wonderful program. Why would you want to threaten all of those children? Sojourner House is a domestic violence support entity and shelter in Rhode Island that supports women when they come out of an abusive relationship and need a place to find immediate safety and try to put their lives together. It is supported by federal grants that President Trump tried to shut down today. It is astonishing. $33 million in small business loans out in Rhode Island with a big question mark by them because of today's bad behavior. So, it's the community health centers. People had doctor's appointments. People were going in for minor procedures and treatments. And suddenly there's a cloud over the ability to fund the community health centers. This is just wild, extreme, dangerous stuff. And to be, let my lawyer roll for a minute, talk about unconstitutional. The Constitution provides a method for the president to veto legislation he doesn't like. That veto method does not include not being the president, coming in a whole new administration, having missed completely the opportunity to do a proper veto, or for Congress to override, and doing this unilateral thing, which is not only forbidden by the separation of powers in the veto rule, but also by law Congress passed regarding so-called impoundments. So it's flagrantly illegal. And I'll close by saying it's also a threat of corruption. Every time you look at the Trump administration, you got to lift up the hood and look for where the corruption threat is. We're going to see corruption like you've never seen before out of this administration. And the corruption threat here is that you close all these things down, and then you pick the ones you like for the people who are your big donors, for the companies who gave you big bucks, for the special interests who put you in office, for the political allies who serve you, and you let them have their money freed up while everybody else is frozen. Think that's imaginary? It's exactly what the Trump administration did with the tariffs in his last term of office. You could go into a secret little line, and if you knew the right people, you could get a waiver. There is an absolute avenue to corruption in this. Thank God the courts shut it down. This was a bad moment. It is not over. And I hope that my Republican colleagues will rise to the occasion, because this is a basic attack on our Constitution, and it's a basic attack on the legislative branch of government.
President, I'm honored to be with my colleagues on the floor to talk about the actions that have become very manifest in Virginia today because of the president's executive orders, particularly the recent order pausing federal funding, grant funding, program funding. And I want to thank my colleagues for being here on the floor to talk about this and share just in the last 24 hours what Virginians are saying and what Virginians are asking and what Virginians are worried about. And then I want to make one point about my federal workforce and an offer that the president made to them at the end of the day. And then finally raise a question of what President Trump is afraid of. President Trump has 2 Republican houses. If he wants to do something to shrink the size of government, if he wants to do something to reduce spending here or there, we've got a March 14 budget deadline, and he's got 2 Republican houses, and there's a way to do this unless you are afraid that your Republican majorities don't want to go as far as you do in cutting Medicaid and cutting Medicare and endangering Social Security and hurting kids and hurting veterans and hurting families. So let me talk about the orders of the day and then the federal workforce and finish with this question: what is President Trump afraid of? I started to hear from Virginians about this federal funding pause yesterday. I was at an event in Fredericksburg to kick off tax season, and the local United Way and Chamber of Commerce were initiating something they've done for 21 years in a row: volunteer tax assistance for low and middle income folks. Classic community program. A lot of volunteers help everyday folks figure out how to file their taxes and make sure that they can get benefits that they are entitled to. As I was at this kickoff, people came up to me and said, "Hey, I'm a veteran. I'm trying to get an appointment at a VA hospital or clinic, but the VA portal is closed to me. What's going on?" What's going on? This was the leading edge of this chaos. Someone else came to me at this session, this kind of good news event about volunteer tax assistance, and said, the federal government is paid to build a VA clinic in Fredericksburg, state of the art, right on Interstate 95, visible to all, scheduled to open in February. We are still being told that the grand opening is going to happen, but now those working there are saying they're under a hiring freeze. We've spent tens of millions of dollars to build this facility that looks great, but we're under a hiring freeze. Can we even hire people to serve the veterans in this region? This was how it started. From then to today, let me tell you other calls of anguish we've received in our office. 2 child care centers, one in the Williamsburg area, one in Appalachia, far, far away in Southwest Virginia. We think our funding is being cut off. We think we may not have enough to pay staff. And we also think parents who are receiving some child care funding, that may get cut off. And so neither they can afford child care nor we can afford to maintain the employment of these hardworking child care workers to child care centers. Universities reached out to me today. We're doing cutting-edge medical research. We have contracts that are ongoing right now, and we're about to send a bill to the federal government because we do the work and then we submit bills. We're not sure it's going to be paid. What do? Lay off the researchers and not get the research done? What should we do, Senator? There's an organization in Virginia called the Virginia Healthcare Foundation. What they do is they help low-income people and seniors apply for Medicaid, apply for Affordable Care Act subsidies. They have a contract with CMS to help them hire 8 staffers, they call them navigators, who work around the state helping low-income people access programs to which they are entitled, for which they have paid taxes. They received the note suggesting that that grant to hire these navigators to help everyday people was going to expire, and they couldn't get any federal funding after 5 o'clock today. They heard this late yesterday, so they did what any good organization would do. They reached out this morning to the CMS to say, please give us the payment right now before 5 o'clock today. And what they got back from CMS was, sorry, our website is down. We've just decided that today will be the day that we'll just spend time repairing our website, and it will be open again soon. Open again soon, but after the 5 o'clock deadline. You don't have to be a genius to figure this out. Hurting people getting health insurance, hurting people trying to get Medicaid benefits, hurting child care centers, hurting veterans trying to get appointments, hurting a VA clinic we've spent tens of millions of dollars to build by threatening, through a hiring freeze, the ability of this place to open. And that's just a little snapshot. There was an earlier order freezing foreign assistance funding. A whole lot of nonprofits, church-based nonprofits like World Vision and other organizations that do foreign assistance work around the world, humanitarian aid in Ukraine, for example, they were told they don't get funding anymore. The only foreign assistance we will give, according to the Trump executive order, is military armaments transfers to 2 countries in the world, Egypt and Israel. No humanitarian aid, no transfer of military assistance to other nations. And this is all on the say-so of a president trying to overturn existing appropriations bills that have been passed by bipartisan Congress. If I've heard these stories in one day, and my colleagues have heard these stories in one day, I know what I'm going to hear tomorrow. I'm going to hear through the weekend. This is going to build like an avalanche, and it's not just Democratic senators who are hearing these stories. We have to respect the law and congressional appropriations. And I ask anyone hearing who's concerned about this, if you're in Virginia, call my office. If you're not in Virginia, call your congressman or woman, call your senator, and tell them the president is not above the law. The president must follow the law, and it's Congress, Democrats and Republicans, who have to ensure that the president follows the law. Second, Mr. President, I want to talk about federal employees. The federal employees received an interesting email at the end of the day today. I happen to have some fellows assigned to me who are not Senate employees, but they are executive branch employees, as most of us have, working in my office. And they received an email that said, from the administration, if you tender your resignation by next Friday, we will guarantee you payment through the end of September, whether or not you show up for work. So tender your resignation, and then, boy, it's just going to be a gravy train. You're just going to get paid for 7 months without working. The president has no authority to make that offer. There's no budget line item to pay people who are not showing up for work. This is a guy who made this promise to contractors again and again and again when he was a private business guy. Oh, come work for me on my casino. Come work for me in a hotel. We're going to do a handshake. We're going to do a contract. The contractor does the work and then finds out they get stiffed. So my message to federal employees who receive this is, yeah, the president has tried to terrorize you for about a week and then gives you a little sweetheart offer. If you resign in the next week, we're just going to pay you for doing nothing for the next 7 months. Don't be fooled. He's tricked hundreds of people with that offer. If you accept that offer and resign, he'll stiff you just like he stiffed the contractors. He doesn't have any authority to do this. Do not be fooled by this guy. You were here before he was here, and you'll be here after he was here. Show up for work, be diligent, serve Americans every day, make their life better, answer their phone call, give them an answer, track down their constituent call. Don't be fooled by a fake offer that because he's terrorized you in the last week, it would be easy to just resign now and get a check for 7 months, because I can tell you that promise is worth nothing. And you will regret it just like these contractors regretted it who did work for this guy when he was a businessman. Finally, Mr. President, last thing I'll say is this. What is this move by the president to try to shrink the federal workforce? Because we all know this. If he can persuade a bunch of people to resign, he'll stiff them, and then he won't fill the position. So, okay, that's one way to shrink the federal workforce. If I can get away with not distributing money that pursuant to a congressional appropriation, okay, that'll shrink the federal budget. But wait a minute. The president has 2 Republican houses. We are supposed to come up with a budget deal by March 14. What's today? Is it like the 25th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 28th? Is today the January 28th? Think I'm right? March 14 isn't very far away. We are supposed to come up with a budget deal by March 14th. And the president is like sitting in the catbird seat. He's got 2 Republican houses. So if he wants to slash federal spending, if he wants to reduce the federal workforce, if he wants to gut Medicaid, gut Medicare, gut Social Security, gut the SNAP program, gut low-income heating assistance, gut rental assistance, gut Title I funding to our public schools, guess what? He's got 2 Republican houses that he can persuade to do his bidding. He's been pretty good so far at persuading these 2 houses to do his bidding. So why didn't he do that? That would be the lawful way to accomplish that. If President Trump could convince the 2 houses to slash all these programs in a budget, that would be lawful. Get an appropriations deal that cuts all these programs the way he and Russell Vogt and Project 2025 want to do it. But that's not what he's doing. He's doing it, trying to do it on his own. Why? Why would President Trump, who has a clearly legal path ahead of him that he can exercise over the course of the next 6 weeks, it's not very long, to get a budget deal with 2 Republican houses, why would a President Trump with 2 Republican houses in 6 weeks to get a budget deal to do everything he wants, why would he not exercise that route, but instead use an illegal route as an executive to slash funding contrary to clear statute? It's because he doesn't think that elected Republican members of the House of Representatives and the Senate will go along with his radical plans. He doesn't think he can convince my GOP colleagues to take the axe to all these programs and hurt the American people in the way he wants to. Let's make President Trump do this the right way, not the wrong way. Let's put it on the shoulders of President Trump and the 2 Republican majorities. You want to slash all this stuff? Fine. Have that debate. on the floor of the Senate, on the floor of the House, when we're doing the budget negotiation between now and March 14, show the American public your homework. Show them who's going to get hurt. Show them that we're going to hurt everyday people at the expense of the big guys that are getting the tax cut in the reconciliation bill later. Let's really have that debate right here in the full view of the American public with these spotlights on and the TV broadcasting it. That's what this president is afraid of, and that's why he's using this illegal strategy to accomplish what he is afraid he can't accomplish in the Article I branch.
As much as President Trump desires it, the president is not a king. We are here tonight because as much as President Trump desires it, the law is not a suggestion. And we are here tonight because President Trump, deciding he is a king and the law is a suggestion, has decided to betray American families. You've heard of the Great Depression, but right now, we're living through the Great Betrayal. The story of a man who ran for the presidency saying he was going to be a champion for families. And then, shortly after taking office, just 8 days ago, he proceeds to launch an attack on the very core programs that families, parents, children, communities depend on. Wow! Have you ever seen anything like it? Ever seen like it in your life? That someone campaigns for families and just after they're sworn into office, they launch a huge attack on America's families. And that attack is actually illegal because the law, once programs are funded, it is the executive's responsibility to implement those programs. Not to say, well, I'll implement this one, but not that one, or I'll shut down all the funding for all the programs. No. In fact, we've had that conversation in the past. Let's turn the clock back to President Nixon. President Nixon said, you all reached a compromise, and you had some programs some of you liked, and some programs others liked, and you agreed to fund those programs, but you know what? I'm only going to fund the ones I like. I'm only going to distribute the funds for those programs which fit my agenda. And the courts responded and said, no, you can't do that. The power of the purse sits with Congress. It is Congress that decides what is going to be spent on what, and it's executive, the president's responsibility to implement that. And then Congress said, you know what? We'll give the president a break. If the president wants to roll back a program that's already been authorized and funded, he can ask Congress to do it. It's in the 1974 Budget Control and Impoundment Act, and it's called a rescission. The president sends a message up to us and says, hey, you know what? I don't think we need all the funds for developing that new nuclear warhead because it turns out it won't fit on a missile. I'd like to have those funds rescinded, put back in the Treasury. And we have 45 days to act. It's a privileged motion. All right, so along comes the great betrayal president, President Trump, who campaigned on families and then decided to attack the programs for families just 1 week into the office. And he says, I don't like that rescission structure. I'm just going to do what Nixon did. I'm going to do what the court said couldn't be done because I don't like what the Supreme Court decided previously. I'm just going to break the law. Now, is this like out of character for President Trump? Well, certainly just hours after being sworn into office and taking the oath to the Constitution of the United States of America, he said the 14th Amendment, I'm canceling it. Wow. Now we have two major instances of breaking the Constitution with just 8 days into the office. That's quite the record. And the thing is, real victims across this country. My colleagues have laid it out so well. The fact that that grant to run the women's shelter is locked up. That program to run child care center is canceled. The grant to keep us at the forefront of semiconductor R&D in Corvallis, Oregon is on hold. That medical research is frozen. That contract for vaccination programs so we don't end up with an epidemic that will hurt children can't be written. That employment program for veterans returning from a theater of war ain't happening. No, that's crazy. And all these things affecting our families, and not just our families, our infrastructure. We worked so hard in a bipartisan way to launch the biggest infrastructure program since Eisenhower. Well, he did the massive national interstate highway system. But you know, it's a long time ago. So we said, we have to rebuild our bridges. We have to improve our mass transit. And we had a very large expenditure trying to bring these up to speed. Well, you know, in my state, there is a bridge on the interstate between Oregon and Washington. It's still a drawbridge. It's like the last drawbridge in the United States of America. It has to be replaced. But now it's on hold. We have another bridge that is under contract or grants to be able to be earthquake resistant because it will play a critical role when the big one, the one we always talk about, like California might fall into the sea, when that earthquake that happens roughly every 300 years off the coast of the United States on the west coast, like we need to have a bridge that actually holds up to it. Well, who knows if that's going to get built now. So not only does this attack families, not only does this obstruct and delay infrastructure projects, but it drives up costs. You know, I seem to have an echo in my ear about the president saying he wants to reduce costs. But instead, when you slow down projects, the cost of materials goes up. What is that? That's called driving up costs. So we're here tonight to say this cannot happen. We're here tonight to say to our Republican colleagues, this is not about red and blue or Republican and Democratic states. I talked to a colleague earlier today who said, I'm getting all kinds of calls from my home. And I bet that's true for every one of our 100 senators. I know everybody on this side of the aisle has been hearing from folks back home saying, we're pretty upset, we're pretty worried, what is happening? You know, that portal where we get funding for Medicaid, or that portal where we get funding for veterans benefits, or whatever it is, it's all shut down. I'm sure all 100 senators have been getting these calls. This is an attack by an authoritarian in the executive branch on the constitutional powers of Congress. You know, when we talk about the branches of government, we talk about Article 1 and Article 2 and Article 3. Article 1 of the Constitution is about Congress, because at the heart of democracy are folks who are elected down the hall in the House of Representatives, here in the Senate, to wrestle with and shape the law. Article 2 is the executive who executes those laws. Article 3 are the judges who defend the Constitution. Well, so here we are. Article 2, President, with authoritarian impulses, is attacking all of us here, all 100 senators, all 435 or so members of the House of Representatives, and saying, I want to take the power and decide how things get distributed for things that have already been enacted. Well, so that's why we're here. And I must say, it's even worse. It's even worse than simply this attack on families and this violation of the Constitution. It's part of a vast authoritarian power grab. In just the past few days, the inspector generals for agency after agency have been fired. The inspector generals are the ones who make sure the executive branch is according to the law, behaving according to the law. And they do all kinds of reports that hold people accountable. They do things about this program is working, that program is not working, this is being done in accordance with the law, this isn't. If the inspector generals are not there, there's no one to hold people accountable. That's the point of firing them all. That should put terror in everyone about the lawlessness President Trump intends to go forward with. I know there's all kinds of other things, all kinds of other attacks. For example, all of those lawyers in the Department of Justice who are assigned to environmental crimes, like when companies put huge amounts of asbestos and dump it in the wrong place, or huge amounts of chemicals that contaminate some groundwater and cause all kinds of citizens to have wells that they can't use anymore, or so on and so forth. Every one of them has been tossed. They got the word. They're not there anymore, just within a few days of the start of this administration. So I thank my colleagues who came here tonight to talk about this. The architect of this plan is a man named Russell Vought. Russell Vought did the last budget for Trump in his first time he served. And then he started a nonprofit think tank that worked to develop the basic plans for Project 2025. And then he became the architect of Project 2025, and it has three main parts. The first part, attack and tear down programs for America's families, the ones that help them get on their feet and be able to thrive and move into the middle class. The second part is to borrow $2 to $3 trillion from the federal treasury. And the third part is to do massive tax giveaways to the richest Americans. He's laid all three of them. Check it out, Project 2025. He came and talked to us all about all these programs, these three steps. Savage, the programs for families. Of course, that wasn't exactly the words he used. He just said massive cuts to things like Medicaid, massive cuts to things like child care programs. Everybody should be on their own with no foundation to have any assistance getting on their feet and being able to move forward. Not on health care, not on housing, not on education, not on child care, not on anything. Well, that's the attack on families. That's the great betrayal. Now, he's going to be voted on this Thursday in the Budget Committee. And the Budget Democrats and our Democratic leader have written and said this vote should be delayed. We are in the middle of a constitutional crisis. The architect of that crisis is the man to be voted on Thursday. This is wrong. Let's fix this constitutional crisis and then continue with the conversation about confirmation of the nominee, Russell Vought. Mr. President, let's work together, Democrats and Republicans, to defend the institutions of our democracy. Let's say no to this sweeping authoritarian power grab. Let's defend the Constitution. Thank you, Mr. President.